Miranda, welcome to the show.
Lovely to be here.
How many biographies have you written? Is this like your fifth or sixth?
Oh my gosh, I have to count. I think it might be about 7, alarmingly.
Okay, all right.
Something like that.
And so this is about Jean Rhys, but I want to just back up a little bit. You've written a ton of stuff, a bunch of novels. We were talking some children's fiction. You wrote a kind of memoir. Writing, obviously, this is what you do. Was it always what you were going to do? Is that the only plan, or were there other possibilities for young Miranda when you were just a girl?
Because I grew up in an enormous house where I still live in the country, which is kind of old and very romantic, my parents started me off giving tours of the house to the public who came round in groups of 20.
Wait.
When I was about 8.
Wait. Slow down. You lived in a house that people would want to tour. What was this house?
It is this house. I'm sitting in it right now.
Okay, yeah.
I'm sitting in a room where the Babington plot was hatched to kind of give you the flavor of
Holy
it.
moly.
Mary,
Okay.
Queen of Scots on the throne and all of that kind of thing. Yep, this is my home.
Weird. Okay, so you were born in history. You were born in Old English history.
And I think this is probably the only explanation for why I've always loved really telling stories, is because my parents, none of them were writers, none of my family, but right from the age of about 10, they said, if you want to take a tour around the house, go tell them stories. Really? And so quite quickly I found out, which I shouldn't really be sharing with you, but it's terrible truth, aged about 10, that I could tell my credulous audience pretty much anything and they would believe it. And so I became very, very inventive with my history of the house. And that's where it all began.
So you've written a lot of books, and so you must have started pretty early. Was it right out of university, or did you have to muck around doing other things first?
I started my life. My parents didn't want me to go to university. They thought that was something that other girls did, but not girls like me who married a nice posh man in a big house, that stuff.
Okay.
So what happened was that they got me trained as a secretary with a kind of typing course.
Right.
And I have the very proud record of having been sacked 16 times as a secretary in 2 years. By that time, even my parents had given up. It was plain that career wouldn't work. And instead of marrying this posh man with a big house, I married a writer. And I told him about my first book, which was going to be a great history of the Renaissance, never published and just as well. And he encouraged me. And a little bit, I'm not in the least like Colette, but it's sort of like that. He gave me a room and said, you stay in that room, you write 1,000 words a day, and that's what you do every day. That's how you start the discipline of writing. So right about the age of 23, I got an education in how you've got to be very, very disciplined.
Okay, so there you are. But at some point, you make the transition to start writing biographies.
Yes.
And which was your first?
I have to say, first of all, that it came out of university, because when I finally did go, I got really enchanted by a special course on Henry James. And I loved the woman who was teaching it. And she was the one who said, why don't you write about Henry James and his circle and kind of move away from doing these, very good selling and everything fictions, but be a bit more ambitious.
Okay.
And so that was my first book. And it was so difficult to do because it was looking at Henry James and a whole group of writers who lived around him in England. And I had to kind of do portraits of all of them and entwine them with James. So it was a good discipline.
Yeah.
Very hard to do.
But you already had the muscle, the research muscle that you had built up from writing historical fiction a little bit. It's not the same. It strikes me, but
I think also if someone who's like me, who's really, I have to say, because of the kind of social world I came from had a very poor education. The plus side of that is, if you are, I don't know, interested, adventurous, keen on reading, that you have this hunger for knowledge for the rest of your life. It's never left me.
Yeah.
And I would say that more than anything else has driven me in my biographical work.
So I was going to ask you, so the most recent is I Used to Live Here Once, The Haunted Life of Jean Rees. I mean, when you have to start a new project, do you just like, I actually interviewed Nora Ephron before she passed away. And I said, you working on another movie? And she was like, oh yeah, they always want another one. I was like, what? You're all exhausted because you have to make a movie. But do you go through that? You're like, okay, it's time to write another biography. Or do you scout around for, no, you're just.
No, with me, it's two things. One is there's always the urge to get some money, because at the end of doing a biography, they finally do the final payment, and that's great. Then you go and spend it.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you look at your bank balance and you think, time to write another biography. That's the kind of inglorious bit.
Sure.
The odd bit, and I'd love to know if other biographers feel the same way. And if you do, maybe it's just writers in general, that when my book's finished and there's all the excitement of it coming out, which I'm going through now, and that's really thrilling, and there's the responses and the reviews and the festivals and stuff, and then there's suddenly this absolute terror of the vacuum, which is me when I'm not writing. And I think, who am I?
That's right.
Oh my God, I'm nothing. And then I push, somebody else comes in, and that's all right. They occupy the space and I'm not worried anymore.
Reading this, because I haven't read a lot of biographies, and what I was struck by, I always read with the writer's mind. I'm sure you do the same thing. You can't help but think what the author had to go through to write it. But what I was fascinated by was how, in a way, you're having a kind of conversation with the reader in a sense, because you kind of address us a little directly, like, okay, I know this, I don't know that, I'm pretty sure of this. Like, there's a certain amount of actual, even though you yourself aren't coming forward that much, there is an acknowledgement of what you can and can't fully know. Is that fair to say?
I think so. I don't think that so much. I don't think it's about the things you can't know, because this sounds kind of arrogant, but when I get really into a biography, I feel I can know everything.
Almost
but
everything.
that there are certain things, this wasn't the case with Jean Rees really, but it was certainly with some of the books I've written. There are things you can't say. There are things that you get told, and which
by her family or whatever.
Usually family or related. And the more you get involved with the family and become almost like an extra member of the family, the more they will tell you stuff that they wouldn't tell other people. You become almost like, I know, a therapist or something. And there's then this very, very difficult line that you have to draw between what, it sounds like the newspapers, the need to know, but it's what it would be wrong to portray, and what is essential for the reader to know in order to understand the person you're writing about. And that's a really, really hard line to walk.
Do you ever get into someone's life and go, man, they just sat in their desk and they wrote, and then they went to bed, and then they got up and they wrote again, and there's no story here? I feel like if someone wrote my story, I don't know what they would find. Well, maybe there'd be something. Is it ever happened that you've just had to junk something or really dig to find a narrative thread?
I somehow have never found that to be the case. All the people, I guess before I begin on their lives, I want to find that they're extraordinary. And so I've never been bored by them. And I've always found that the life outside the books is, certainly in Jean Rees's case, even more extraordinary than the life she wrote about in her books.
It doesn't surprise me. I've probably done 1,000 of these conversations, and I think everyone's interested. I think that if you give someone your attention, they're interested. I'm not saying like you're not an interesting person naturally, but people are naturally interesting if you give them space. And so perhaps it's the same thing with the biography, that everyone's life conceivably could be written about if even the small lives, right?
I think that's the other thing I find very comforting about biography is once or twice have been the ghastly moment when somebody has said, actually, somebody else is writing that book too. And that causes a big moment when you're going, oh my God, what shall I do?
Right.
And then I remind myself that I do honestly think that a biography is as much written out of yourself as it is about the person you're writing about, because you connect to the things that you can relate to. So even if you and I both decided to write lives of Nora Ephron, they would come out completely different, because the woman I would be looking for and you would be looking for aren't the same woman.
Miranda, I got one more question, and it's this. I want you to think of all the writing you've done. You've done so much. More to do, but I want you to think all the writing you've done, if it's taught you anything. It's taught you.
Ooh, I tell you what it's taught me is, this sounds a bit pious. I write mostly, almost entirely, about difficult women. And they're regarded as difficult women because they're women who have been not well treated by history. And then I kind of learn more about them. And what I've learned is the lessons they learned. So they've become like my touchstones in life. And I hold all of them inside me because I know so much. They're my friends and my guides.